Now, if you had to summarise the British Grand Prix in just a single word, I'm sure there would be a plethora of positivity in the comments. Whether that be something to highlight the semi-soaked excitement of the hard-to-navigate weather, or something related to the intensity of the on-track action, there is certainly a lot to be happy about as fans. What then if I told you that there were some drivers that would best describe the race as disappointing? Not only that, but possibly even downright depressing. Obviously that'd be expected, right? There are only 10 points positions up for grabs after all. However, I'm talking about the people fighting at the front, and in a twisted way that may not quite hit him until after the race winner himself could be the most disappointed of all. Now, don't get angry at us in the comments just yet. You're gonna want to stick around for this one, and then you can decide if we're crazy or not. Wanna know how the events at Silverstone unfolded? With all the action at the front, some pretty amazing moments may have flown under the radar. And stick around, because if we were Lewis, we'd be crying too, but not for the same reasons that he was on the cooldown lap. So Lewis Hamilton's final British Grand Prix with the team he dominated the sport with for over half a decade ended in victory. The first couple of laps almost gave us flashbacks to those days, with George and Lewis disappearing down the road, leaving those behind them out of DRS range by the time it was active, following what seemed to be a perfectly executed plan to keep the second row behind the Silver Arrows. Sadly for George, he wouldn't see the checkered flag due to a water pump failure, preventing the possibility of a Mercedes double podium or even a 1-2. Max Verstappen managed to capitalize on the poor strategy and misfortunes of other drivers to claw his way to a hard-fought second place, proving once again that he is capable of making all the difference on a Sunday, driving the clean and secure race that he needed to move past the events of Austria and bolstering his lead at the top of the championship. Now that there have been 6 winners from 4 different teams, Red Bull may just be thanking their lucky stars that there are teams around them taking points off of each other, because if it was just one of either Mercedes or Mclaren with Red Bull in their sights, then the early season's advantage that Verstappen has made for himself may disappear far quicker than we may see throughout the remainder of the season, with all the teams taking points off of each other. Further down in the points, Nico Hülkenberg has continued to perform miracles by dragging his Haas to a second consecutive 6th place finish, once again legitimizing Audi's trust in him to be the right man to herald their F1 project in its early years. A double point scoring home race for Aston Martin, with Stroll proving to maintain an improved race form ever since announcing his 2-year extension, something those in the know will understand is a pretty big deal from the charismatic Canadian who just won't stop talking in his interviews. Alex Albon rounded off a great weekend for Williams with a 9th place finish, with Logan Sargent securing 11th place as the American driver continues to push ever closer to a first points finish for the season. Rounding off the points was Yuki Tsunoda, putting any talk of Daniel Ricciardo beating him comprehensively to bed, proving that he hasn't been bested by the Aussie and further increasing his lead over the Honey Badger in the championship. The bottom end of the constructors is split by just 31 points at the moment, with Aston Martin in a no man's land as it stands by doubling that points total. So the bottom 5 places are going to be hard fought all the way to the end of the season to secure the all-important millions in the approach to the new regulations. So with that out the way, let's get into some disappointments, shall we? I'll keep the first one brief. Sergio Perez. Okay, cool, moving on. Starting from the most obvious, George Russell seeing yet another opportunity for a race win slip through his fingers, this time at no fault of his own, must have been absolutely heartbroken. According to the Brit, he could see it coming as it had been an issue for multiple laps at that point, but that clearly didn't stop it from hurting all the same when he got the call to retire the car, as he had this to say while there were still cars audible in the background. Probably about 10 laps before I had to retire, I saw temperature alarms coming up on my steering wheel and some sort of water cooling failure. I don't really know what to say, the car was feeling so good. I knew it was going to be a long race, I struggled a bit around the damp patches, but very gutting. Seeing his teammate on the top step on a weekend where the team was on top was clearly not what he would have been dreaming about the night before after taking pole position, and following the early stint, it seemed that Mercedes were heading for a dominant win at the drivers' home Grand Prix. I guess George needs to just stop heralding the race tomorrow after getting a pole position, as if we hear him say we've got a race to win one more time, we think we might just have to slap him. Another driver clearly disappointed with their home Grand Prix was Lando Norris, who was a particularly somber image following the race. In a season when you've been able to challenge for wins and have finished on the podium in the majority of races, only having one win to your name clearly starts to have an impact. Norris was given the reins in terms of deciding which tyre he would see the race out on following a stint on Inters, with both of his fellow podium sitters pitting the lap prior. If you were to ask his teammate, the fresh mediums were the clear option. If you were to ask most fans, the mediums were the clear option. Hell, I'm pretty sure if you asked pretty much everyone but the Ferrari strategy team, who would have likely said, slap on the wet sun and go for it, they would have said that the mediums were the clear option. However, seeing the man he was chasing was on softs and not going too slowly, as well as them having no discernible drawbacks at the time, Norris decided to match the man he was chasing for the win. This proved to be the wrong choice, something Norris was clearly dejected about following the race, emphasizing just how many opportunities the team has missed so far this year. Yet another reason why Verstappen still sits with a sizable gap at the top of the championship. This is what Norris had to say after the race. "I'm not making the right decisions. I blame myself today for not making some of the right decisions, but I hate it." Before going on to give a brutal summary of his recent weekends, saying, "I know it's a podium at the British Grand Prix, but I'm fed up of just saying I should have done better and I should have done this and I could have done that or whatever. I don't care if it takes time. I don't want it to take time. I should be doing it now. We should be winning now. I should be making better decisions than what I'm making." And it wasn't just Lando who thought the race win was there for the taking, with Jenson Button highlighting his teammate's speed following a switch up to the medium tyres which were available to Norris. When asked if Mclaren threw away a race win, Button had this to say: "They did. 10 seconds is what Piastri gained by running the medium compared to Lando on softs." And it wasn't only Lando's side of the garage that was left with a bitter taste, as Oscar was also clearly disappointed for another reason entirely. Piastri was hung out to dry while the rest of the field switched to intermediates, with McLaren deciding not to double stack like the Mercedes behind them, causing Oscar to fall back from second to a lowly 6th, something he couldn't recover from in regards to a podium spot, but he did well against the odds to pull himself back to 4th. Despite his disappointment, Oscar had sympathy for his team, as the youngest yet coolest head on the grid had this to say: "I think, to be honest, that decision in the race is probably the hardest call you're ever going to have to make in motor racing. You've got two cars, 1-2, separated by half a second with rain coming down. I don't think it gets any harder than that." Before going on to highlight the moment he knew it had all gone horribly wrong. "As soon as I went past the pit entry, I knew it was the wrong call. The last couple of corners were very tough, and I could see on my dash that Lando was like 5 seconds behind me when I pitted, so I knew I was in a lot of trouble then." And today may also mark the moment that another driver realizes they are in trouble. Having had the elation of his first win in 946 days, his first since Saudi 2021, Lewis Hamilton will stumble into his room after a night of celebrations and remember that this is it. He will never have a sound strategy at the British Grand Prix again, and not only that, he'll likely have to put up with a Charles Leclerc who, after another 6 months of putting up with Ferrari, will likely be on a mental health watch list. Obviously, Lewis has famously had incredibly good decision making, with his much criticized at the time jump from McLaren to Mercedes proving to be career-defining, but given that Ferrari have allowed themselves to slip back from being the second fastest team to arguably the 4th fastest, is a bag fumbling of epic proportions. Now Mercedes and McLaren are fighting up ahead of them, with Red Bull maintaining a competitive edge on one side of the garage at least. It's hard to see Ferrari getting up to the top step outside of individual circumstances or sheer luck. Carlos Sainz would even herald this race as one of his strongest performances at Ferrari, with the car just not being fast enough to compete at the top of the field, which is a far cry from his win in Australia, and Leclerc looks to be a shadow of the man he was when he sat on the top step at Monaco. Maybe Hamilton needs to hope that Mercedes continue to fight at the front, as he surely cannot trust Ferrari to be consistent enough to guarantee him a win in red. If Mercedes ends up falling back from the front, then maybe we have just witnessed the last Grand Prix win of his career. Though if you ask us, we think the old dog still has at least another left in him. So, are we crazy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.